What do you add? It's Paul from Wicked Acorn. I hit the wrong button again. Ah, oh my. Those things happen. Live TV. We're live. Well, welcome back. Welcome aboard. We're looking at this day in history. We're going to jump right into it because I came across something I want to show you. So let's get into it. I'm going to get my tea in my Brew Crew mug, in my I Love Didsbury mug. Good evening, Astraxen 1234. Happy Trafalgar Day. So that was our last Where Is It photo. And we'll get to that in a minute. Here's our next Where Is It photo. Have a look and see if you can figure out where this place is while I get a sip of tea. Give me a break because I was rushing around the house last minute things before hitting the go button. So that is, I'll give you a clue. It's not in this neck of the woods. So I'll show you that again before we leave and see if you can figure out where that place is. It will have something to do with tomorrow's video. On this day in history, and that is our Where Is It photo. This one from the last live stream. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan, his expedition successfully navigated the Strait of Magellan, a waterway he named Estrecho de Todos los Santos, Strait of All Saints. This passage, located at the southern tip of Chile, provided a crucial link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which was a major milestone in maritime exploration and led to the first circumnavigation of the globe. Although Magellan himself died before its completion, the transit took 38 days, a feat that established a new trade and exploration route. 38 days to get through the Straits of Magellan. It took like 3 years or something to get around the world. So I got a little video to show you about that, just because until this morning, I didn't know a lot about Magellan's voyage. Of course, I know of Magellan. He's very well known in history, his daring do. But here in this country and in my country, we kind of focus on Drake more, being the Englishman to first do it. All right, let's see if I can remember to turn the mic back on.
Ferdinand Magellan was the man who proved that the world was round.
Ferdinand Magellan showed extraordinary courage by setting out to sail around the globe when there were still many who believed the world was flat and that he would fall off.
Magellan was born in Sabrosa, Portugal around 1480 and studied navigation at an early age.
In 1505, Magellan traveled with the new arriving Portuguese viceroy to India and got his first taste of sea travel, the itch to explore. He moved around Southeast Asia and maybe even traveled as far as Indonesia and what were then known as the Spice Islands.
So I didn't know a lot of this stuff until this morning, but when they reached like the Spice Islands, which is where everybody wanted to get, they wanted to get to the Spice Islands. That's why he was trying to go the other way around, because Spain and Portugal were at each other's throats. And I mean, this is back when Spain and Portugal ruled the waves. This is before Britannia ruled the waves. And Spain and Portugal divided the world in two. and Spain owned the western part, and Portugal owned the eastern part, the Spice Islands. But of course, turns out it's a sphere and it goes all the way around. And that was another thing. When they got back, they realized they had lost a day. Is it lost a day or gained a day? I can't remember. And they keep good records in their logbooks when they're traveling, but they had lost a day or gained a day. I can't remember which it is. So they were at each other's throats. So that's why this whole thing came about. And Portugal was in control of the Spice Islands and the route around Africa. Magellan was Portuguese, and the Portuguese had no interest in it because they already had access to the Spice Islands. So Magellan went to Spain, and the King of Spain backed his mission. Yes, I'm very familiar with the name Garmin. Yeah, Magellan and Garmin, yeah. Magellan, it's spacecraft and craters on the moon. Very famous name. But again, I didn't know much about him until this morning. And I just stopped it there because this is just a really brief thing. So what happened was when he first went to the Spice Islands, he got a slave. And the slave was with him when he went back to Portugal, Spain, and set out on his around the world mission. Magellan didn't make it. Magellan died. When they got back around to the Spice Islands, the slave, whose name I can't remember, began with an E, I think. Anyway, his slave, they think his slave sold him out and got them killed because he was supposed to free him when they got back to the Spice Islands, and he didn't because they kept him on as an interpreter. And so, that being said, a couple of years later, 7, 8 years later, this slave guy, they think, made it back to Spain. He eventually got dropped off wherever he was from, somewhere in that part of the world, somewhere near the Spice Islands. And no, sorry, I'm wrong about that. Getting the point of getting back to the Spice Islands was he was the first one to circumnavigate the globe. That's an interesting point there, because he was picked up in the Spice Islands, brought to Spain, and then went around the world and made it back to the Spice Islands. So the first guy to circumnavigate the world was some native guy in the South Pacific Islands, I guess. So that's an interesting little tidbit.
Is almost certainly where he first got the idea of approaching the Spice Islands rather than east around Africa and then into the Indian Ocean.
When Magellan returned to Europe, he tried to get financing for an expedition to find this new western route to Asia. Eventually traveling past what is today Argentina, Magellan found a route to the Pacific, which is now known as the Straits of Magellan.
Crossing into the Pacific, what Magellan had expected would be a relatively brief voyage to reach the eastern coast of Asia. Turned out to be 6 months in the open sea.
This is a little glitchy. I think that's the Matthew they just showed there. That was Cabot's ship down in Bristol.
Guam, at which point the sailors were, of course, near starvation.
When Magellan and his crew arrived in the Philippines, this was charted territory. They knew where they were.
While still in the Philippines, Magellan was killed by a poisoned arrow on April 27, 1521, in a battle with the locals. His crew continued on without him and finally reached Spain in September 1522, thus definitively proving that the world is round.
Magellan changed the way Europeans navigated. He increased the knowledge of seafaring navigation exponentially, and in the process made the world a much smaller place.
Yeah, you remember the, that's a page called Biography. So check those guys out. Let's give them a like. Yeah, that was an interesting one. The island there is Tierra del Fuego, and that's the island of fire, because when they went through the first time they went through the Straits of Magellan, Tierra del Fuego, there were fires everywhere, like home fires, campfires, whatever. So there were villages everywhere. There was South America was heavily populated back in the 1500s. I was going to say, you remember the movie Shogun, the TV show Shogun? That was a Portuguese ship. So he was an Englishman on a Portuguese ship that went to Japan, because the Portuguese were the big guys back in those days. The Portuguese were the first people in Newfoundland as well. There's what's his name, Gaspar and Corte Real. There's a statue of one of them in front of the Confederation building. That's our House of Parliament in provincial in St. John's. What's next? Got to get to this other screen, get through this day in history, because there's something fun I want to show you. What else we got? 1803, John Dalton, another Manchester man, presented his paper on the absorption of gases by water and other liquids to the Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society, which included the first outline of his atomic theory. So John Dalton is the father of atomic theory, Manchester guy. October 21st, he presented the paper, and that was like the first delving into atomic theory. And he got the idea of all this stuff from the mountains in Wales, because there were no airplanes or any such thing, so he could go up and, you know, observe the different atmospheres and clouds and stuff. The world's oldest treaty is between Portugal and England. Is that right? I'll have to check that out. That sounds interesting. What a beauty. This is the USS Constitution. And although she was on the other side, so to speak, it's still a beautiful ship. The USS Constitution was launched on this day in history, October 21st, 1797, in Boston, Massachusetts, as one of the first 6 warships of the U.S. Navy. The heavy frigate, named by President George Washington, earned its famous nickname Old Ironsides during the War of 1812. It is now the world's oldest commissioned warship still afloat. Is that right? I think she's, because she's still commissioned, so that might be the thing there. She's still commissioned in the U.S. Navy. So she's still, so there's some battles there and things, but that's a beautiful ship. Love those wooden walls. And of course, on October 21st, 1805, we've already pointed out, is the Battle of Trafalgar, and it resulted in a decisive British naval victory over the combined French and Spanish fleets, establishing British naval supremacy. The victory, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, came at the cost of his life. He was shot and killed during the battle aboard his flagship HMS Victory. Now, the Victory is still on the go, but I guess she's not as old as that, right? But I guess the Victory is not in commission now. Is that the distinction there? 1797. So yeah, and I think the Victory was an old ship at the Battle of Trafalgar, but I guess she's no longer in commission. That might be the distinction there. So I got a little video to show you about the Battle of Trafalgar, and we'll watch that. Interesting little video I found here about one of the flags from one of the ships at the Battle of Trafalgar.
Thomas, we are stood here before this incredible object, and the first thing I'm struck by is the sheer size. You're enveloped in the colours of the instantly recognisable Union Jack, but it's not any old Union Jack. Tell me a bit about this flag.
So this is the Union Jack that was flying from HMS Spartiate, which is a ship in Nelson's fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar on the 21st of October, 1805.
Where would it have been positioned on the ship?
It would have been hanging from probably the foretopsail yard. Nelson was a very practical man. He was very concerned about the importance of distinguishing friend from foe in the battle.
So she's still commissioned but not floating. Is she not floating? Is she in dry dock or something? Interesting. I'll have to check into that. That flag is so familiar looking to me. There's a great story about my grandfather and a flag. And when I see that flag, I can smell it, I can feel it, I know exactly what it feels like. It's really coarse cotton fiber. My grandfather gave me one of a ship that he was on when he was a young fellow. Fascinating story. I'll tell you about it someday. When he got older in his later years, he started to write his memoirs, and he wrote one story from his youth, and it starts out, it was the year of the flu, 1918, the year the Spanish flu. And a fascinating story. I'll tell you someday.
And so 11 days before the Battle of Trafalgar, he issued an order that every ship had to have a Union Jack from the foretopsail yard. So it's a kind of classic inspiration of Nelson.
What tactics did Nelson deploy at Trafalgar?
It was a revolutionary approach. Traditional fleet tactics had two fleets sailing in parallel, exchanging broadsides. Nelson wanted a much more destructive, decisive battle. And so he completely turned traditional tactics on their head. The Franco-Spanish fleet was in line. Nelson organized his fleet in two columns, which approached the Franco-Spanish fleet at right angles. The idea was to break it into three pieces and defeat the parts of the fleet individually. This is the classic Nelson move. He called it the Nelson touch at the Battle of Trafalgar. So Spartiate was one of the slowest sailors in the fleet, and naturally, in Nelson's tactics, that would have placed it at the back of Nelson's column. So Spartiate would have been following this column of ships, seeing the Victory right in the distance.
The other thing you can pick up on immediately as well are these holes. They look as though they are shrapnel holes or musket holes or even cannon holes.
The flag was analysed by the owners over the last 16 years, and small fragments of lead have been found, small fragments of wood, which are consistent with battle damage. This one does look very much like as a cannonball footprint, as you might put it. Spartiate was one of the slowest sailors in the British fleet, and so the French fleet had as much time as they wanted, essentially, to pepper the ship. And so it makes complete sense that you would see this kind of peppering of damage throughout the flag. It would have been sailing towards the French fleet pretty much all day. The first British ship engages around midday. The Spartiate probably only engaged about 2.5 hours after, which meant that it was putting up with this hail of cannon fire.
Gosh.
For an additional 2 hours, and the courage involved in that was extraordinary.
Tell me a bit about the history of HMS Spartiate then, because I believe it would have been a ship well known to the French forces.
It was actually a French ship. Originally, the Spartiate was captured by the British at the Battle of the Nile, which was the first kind of great signature victory of Nelson, and was then turned into a British ship. Nelson received a significant injury to his forehead at the Battle of the Nile, and it was said that that was from a shot from the Spartiate.
What was life like on board?
Well, it wouldn't have been a picnic. I mean, everyone knows about the traditions of flogging, the harsh naval discipline, but they were very well fed. They'd be described as the healthiest Britons on the planet at the period. They were consuming about 4,000 calories a day. They were also very well supplied with booze. The rum ration was half a pint of rum at 57% alcohol per man per day. So they would have been quite cheerful. I think that was considered part of making sure they felt looked after. Then crucially, the difference in discipline and the difference in morale is considered to be one of the key factors in the inevitability of the British victory at Trafalgar.
We, of course, are all aware of Nelson's great victory, but it came at huge personal cost.
Nelson was actually...
I've never been to Portsmouth. That's definitely somewhere I want to get because I love all that naval history stuff. And so obviously I haven't been aboard Victory, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing that someday, getting down there. It's in my blood. The sea is in my blood.
Shot by a musketeer. The bullet lodged in his spine. He was carried below decks, and after hours of agonizing suffering, he died. And the thing really that crystallizes the Battle of Trafalgar in its extraordinary place in British history, it's not only the supreme victory, but the supreme sacrifice of Nelson.
It's a really powerful and moving object, so redolent of that chapter in British naval history.
It's the first time I've seen it this close. And that extraordinary kind of charisma it has as a historical object, it's just incredible to think it was there.
So obviously that is Christie's website. So I don't know if that was an auction item. That's yeah, I don't mind rough seas. It's sad to see these things go into private hands, but sometimes that's the only way things survive, is in private hands, isn't it? So we'll get back to what else we got? This is a really interesting one. In 1824, Leeds bricklayer Joseph Aspden patented Portland cement. Now that's something that changed history. The invention of cement, that really changed history, didn't it? A material he created by burning and grinding a mixture of finely ground limestone and clay. The cement was named for its resemblance to the high-quality Portland stone quarried in England, and the patent described the process of heating the mixture in a kiln and then pulverizing the resulting clinker. So that was this day in history in 1824, and that changed the face of the world, didn't it? A lot of controversy about concrete. It off-gases something that's bad for the atmosphere or something. I don't know the rights of it, but in China just pours so much cement. Like, they are by far the largest users of Portland cement. On this day, October 21st, 1917, America saved our ass again. That's when the The American troops from the American Expeditionary Forces 1st Division became the first Americans to enter the front lines of World War I. And that's when they saved our ass. On this day in history in 1940, the first anti-Nazi pamphlets were dropped on the Netherlands by the RAF on October 21st, 1940. The leaflet drops were part of the Allies' psychological warfare campaign during World War II. And this is something we've talked about here before, very briefly. The Wellington bomber, you see a Wellington there in the photo. The Wellington bomber that crashed in Walton Park, that's what they were doing. They were supposed to be on what's called a nickel raid. Do they say why they called it nickels? Known as nickels by the RAF, these leaflets contain news and messages designed to counter Nazi disinformation and encourage resistance. Why did they call them nickel raids? I've forgotten why. Anyway, the Wellington bomber that crashed in Walton Park was supposed to do a nickel raid. They were a crew in training, and they were supposed to do a nickel raid on France, I think, but there was fog. So instead they went to Blackpool, and Blackpool Tower was the mock target for them as a training mission. And they encountered problems and crashed in Walton Park. So that's an interesting little tidbit from this day in history. And a sad one, I don't want to dwell on this one too long. The Aberfan tragedy happened this day in 1966. Terrible, terrible tragedy. But it's just, I mean, look. Can you see my arrow there? Look at these mountains of, what do you call that, slag? What do you call that? Spoil tip of coal, is it? Just mountains of this stuff. And they had rain for, you know what it rains like here sometimes. And it just turned into a slurry and came down the hill, and a bunch of kids were killed. Oh, it's very sad. 144 people, 116 of whom were children. Very, very sad. Very sad. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that too long, because the next one is a really fun one, and this is what I wanted to get to. And I came across this, and I was really surprised afterward that this was in there, because this is kind of an obscure one to be in this day in history. So this guy here is Brian Tobin. Brian Tobin was born on October 21st, 1954 in Stephenville, Newfoundland. Strange thing to be in this day in history. He was the Premier of Newfoundland, and he was a federal cabinet minister. He was the Minister of Fisheries, I think. And he was the Premier in 1997, the Discovery year, with the Matthew, John Cabot, all that. I've talked about it before. And that's when the Queen went to visit. And Tobin was, so we're talking the late 90s. He was, I didn't like him. He was a liberal, which is like liberal. The Liberal Party is more like the Labour Party in this country, not like the Liberal Party in this country. So liberal is more akin to Labour. We have PCs, Progressive Conservative, so that's our Tory party, and the opposition to that is the Liberal Party. And we have a third party, the NDP, the New Democrat Party, and that's Tommy Douglas we were talking about last night. He was in the NDP party. But Tobin was he wasn't as bad as Trump, but he had that Trump everyman flavor to him, although he could wear it more genuinely because, you know, he was born in Stephenville, Newfoundland. Stephenville is like a few thousand people, maybe 5,000 people, maybe. Small place. So, you know, he did a few faux pas, and one of them was uh, when the Queen came to visit. So they're up on the stage with you know, all the dignitaries, and Tobin is there, and he got a lot of flack for this. He he kind of grabs hold of the Queen and shows her to her seat, and, you know, sits her down like you would with an old lady, right? You know, and it's like, oh no, that's not really how that works. He didn't grab hold of her, but, you know, it was a more, you know, like you would with an elderly lady. Showed her to her seat. He didn't, you know, grab her, but he touched her, which was there was a lot of bad press over that. I thought it was okay. The Queen didn't seem to mind at all. But the the thing that got me about this, when I saw this, I started thinking about Tobin. There's another great story about one night the entire Liberal cabinet. We were shooting. No, we were working on the Canada Winter Games. We're building a set for the Canada Winter Games, and that's a story for another time. The bar got shut down. You know, last call, get out, and the entire Liberal cabinet piles into the bar. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, we were there all night, all morning, drinking with the Liberal cabinet. That's a story for another time. But one story about Brian Tobin that got me was I worked on a movie called Random Passage. I'll get it rolling here. I got some shots of it. So this is, do I have sound on this? I'll just let this play as I tell you about it. This is a really, it's, so it's set in, I guess, the early 1800s. It's probably Irish potato famine. When was that? 1840-ish? Somewhere around there, I don't remember the exact date of the potato famine. But this was a TV miniseries. It was a fantastic thing to work on. We worked on it for like 2-3 years. It was really great job to work on, and a lot of fun to work on, because we were out in the middle of nowhere working on building this, you know, 18th century village. And when we got there, there was nothing there. There was no way to get there. The location was chosen because you could look around 360 degrees and there was no evidence of the 20th century whatsoever. We did a winter shoot. So it was over, God, 2-3 years, I think we worked on this. It was incredible. Colm Meaney was the big star in it. Great film. You know, it's a historical docudrama kind of thing. It's from the writer, her I don't know, her great-great-grandmother or something, her journal that she kept. And it's based on, her family's story. And it's about this family that comes over to Newfoundland and their life and trials and tribulations of getting a new life. And this is the site here. Well, I'll get to. I'll let it play because I got the audio off on this. So this is the place here where it was shot. Now, it wasn't like this when we got there. This is from last year, this video. This is Brad Tilley. And so this is the ocean out here. And this is what we call a pond. You would probably call it a lake, but we just call that a pond. Yeah, so there's no evidence of the 20th century whatsoever, or the 21st century whatsoever. You can look 360 degrees, which is what we needed for this set in the 1800s or 1700s, whenever it was. So the village, this is the village down here. The let's go back a bit here. So this is the community here. It's a tiny little community called New Bonaventure, and I shot several movies in this town here. It's a tiny little town called New Bonaventure, and this is the location. It's called White Point, and it's no one ever lived there. It's just vacant land. And this is the church here. And now there's a road right into the site, and you can see there's like a parking lot here. But back when we got there first, it was just a little path, like, that animals would walk. It wasn't, it was really, really rough. And right here, this pond, of course, goes into this little pond and then out into the ocean. But there's a little stream here. Now there's a big proper bridge across it. But when we first got there, it was a log, a single log. That's how we got to work every day. We had to walk all the way out there and teeter over a log to get across this stream here. There was nothing there. By the end of shooting, this road was in place and this bridge was in. There wasn't a parking lot, but so this is the village we built. And when we got there, there was nothing there. And we started with just a few one house at a time. And that's why it took so long to shoot the movie. Because as the story progresses, this is the church up here. That was one of the last things to get built. And this house over here, I can't remember the characters' names. This was one of the last buildings to get built. This is like a proper house, proper 1800s proper house. Everything else is like log cabin kind of construction. And this was a lot of fun to work on. What a great couple of years this was, working on this out in the middle of nowhere. And just fantastic, going around in boats and skidoos and ATVs. It was so much fun. Probably it's not the best thing I've worked on, but the best experience, shall we say, because it was so long and there were so many great experiences. We had a schooner that came in here. They spent one night there. I don't think this is the wharf we built. I think it's been replaced because, as the guys told me, there's never been a wharf here. There was never a community here because it's too rough. It's the wind and ocean is too rough here to build a wharf, and it's got washed away. So that's not the one we built. And it looks like there's been other things built since we did it. But I've always marveled at the first people that went over to Newfoundland from here, because a lot of them came from Ireland and Cornwall and West Country, Devon, those places. I think this is the first house. So as I was saying, as the story progresses, the village gets bigger. So we couldn't just build the whole village. We had to build it as the story progresses, the village progresses. This was the first building. These two, this one here, this has a sod roof, and the roof lifts off so the camera can shoot through the roof, which I don't think they ever did, but we built it that way. This was the first one. This was Colmeany's. He's like the boss of the harbor, and everyone else is a fisherman under his control. And it's it's kind of a love story, but it follows all their trials and tribulations. They get scurvy and all kinds of diseases, and they die, and all kinds of things that really would have happened back in the day. But our coastline is so rugged, and all these guys coming from, the West Country of England, where it's all sandy beaches, and most of the people that went over weren't even fishermen. They were, farmers. They weren't fishermen. They were just looking for a better life, and fishing was the only job you could do. So as you can see, this house here is more modern. When we worked on the museum in Cupid's, I was telling you about the story they had on a loop about Cupid's was the first English colony in Canada, 1610. It's a long ways from here. This is probably, I don't know, a couple of 100 miles from St. John's, the capital city. The very first thing that they did, the Cupid's colony, the very first thing they did was build a pit saw. First thing they did, which is absolutely ridiculous, because we have a lot of trees in Newfoundland, in North America. We have a lot of trees. You don't make boards, you use the whole tree. You build log cabins. You don't make boards. And I mean, that's part of the reason the Cupid's colony and the first colony in America, in Jamestown, it's part of the reason these colonies failed, because they were expecting to just uproot themselves. So this was the last house, and this was like one of the rich guys in the community. Everyone else was just a poor fisherman, and he was like I don't know, some kind of merchant or something. So this was a more modern style house. You'll see the interiors of the other houses, very, very very rugged. I mean, that's pretty normal 18th century living there, isn't it? But these things are pretty pretty rough. It's so all these things here, this with the ramp going up and this thing here, graveyard, of course. Several of the characters die from malnutrition, and they like starve to death and stuff. It's a harsh story, but it was a harsh life. These strange structures, I'll show you in a minute, are called fish flakes, and they're for drying fish. This was one of the last buildings we built as well, the church. And no, there isn't one there. The church, this is funny. Do I have it here? I do. The windows in that church were made with this saw. I forgot to bring a saw to cut the window parts. And of course, there's no electricity. So that's what did the windows in that church. And it's a long hike back to the church where we're parked. Our vehicles were parked. All this stuff, everything there is made from this thing here. So that's more of a, like, what we call a stage, where you tie your boat up and have your supplies and stuff. And this is interesting. This is a school, obviously, because there were a lot of children in the show as well. But this is interesting. Vertical logs. So when they first, because they had to learn everything, because they figured they could just pick up and start their life over in America, in Newfoundland. But no, man, you got so much to get done, and you have so little time before winter comes. The winter shoot, we went out to do the winter shoot, and it's strange because it doesn't snow in Newfoundland until like December. But when it snows, it snows. So there was no snow, and we were going, the date for the winter shoot was approaching, and the dates don't change. You know, it's like it has to be really, really bad for the dates of film shooting to change. Something drastic has to happen. But we needed snow, and it was, the snow was forecast, so there was no snow when we got there. That night it started snowing. The next morning, so when we got there, there was no snow. The next morning, when we went to set, there was 3 feet of snow on the ground, which was perfect for us. We were so happy because that's what we wanted. That's what we needed. But can you imagine if you were living there in the 1800s? You got to have everything ready. You got to have all your firewood cut. You got to have everything you need done for when the snow comes, because that's it. Life shuts down. You spend the next 3 months inside your house. There's nothing you can do. You live inside your house. Well, you go out and you do hunting, and you can still cut firewood and things like that, but you know, it's over, right? The logs in, so what they would do is, you can see this is not traditional log cabin style, but it is. The logs are vertical as opposed to horizontal like normally. And the reason for that is it's the size of a log that one man can carry, right? You can put that log on your shoulder and go. If it's a room, you know, 15, 20 feet long, well, now you need a 15, 20-foot long log, and you got to carry that. So instead, they built them vertically. So as time progresses, these are all things we have to consider when we're recreating history. This is how it was done at first. And that's what Newfoundland was all about. It was all about fish. We supplied the fish to the world. So these structures here are called, not that one, that's more of a stage. This one here, this thing here, there are fish on it. There was so much work created for this show. Salt fish. So what you do is you clean the fish, and the backbone is taken out. So it's opened up like that. I'm sure you've seen this. So it has a very distinctive shape, and it's dried. It's dried in the sun, salted and dried. And that's what fed the world. That's what Britain lived on in the 1800s. You know, that's what you were eating back then. It's what fed the world in the 1800s, in the 1700s, in the 1900s. But we don't do that anymore. We don't salt fish anymore because we have refrigeration. And that's what I was talking about. We can't remember these things. We can't remember these things. You don't think about it. You go to certain places like Jamaica, and Jamaicans use a lot of salt fish, and Portugal uses a lot of salt fish. And these places have strong ties to Newfoundland, as does this country, but Britain entered the 21st century a little faster than some places, didn't it? So these things are all over the place. This is where you would dry your fish. This one is, I was telling you I did a couple of movies in this town, and there's another one that I built in New Bonaventure, another movie I worked on. You'll see at the end of this. It's, but what a fabulous place. So as I said, it was the buildings, the village would grow as the story progressed. You know, we'd build another house, and another family would move in. Another storyline happens with another family moving into the village. So the crew would go off and shoot at another location while we were building the rest of the set. And one of those scenes was with Brian Tobin. Brian Tobin, the Premier of Newfoundland, got to do a cameo in the film. And it was in a town called Trinity. And it's, you know, more built up city kind of place, stone buildings and whatnot. That's like the big town that they go to in the story. This is out around the bay, as we call it. I don't know what that is. Like, this is Random Passage was, 30 years ago. And this video is 8 years ago. So there's things there that I don't recognize. It's a tourist destination now. People go to see the so those things there, those are fake salt fish that you see. these things here. And that's kind of what salt fish looks like when it's drying. So there were thousands of those things made. And that was a full-time job for people back in the day, because you'd have to turn it and turn it and turn it and take it in if it rained, and it was a full-time job. That was the job of the women and children. The men would catch the fish, and the women and children would take care of it. So this place here, this is really funny. I was watching this morning. That view right there, I remember. So when this was built, of course, it was brand new lumber, brand new timber, brand new, like, white, yellow wood. And we painted it to look something like that there. So we had to paint it so it looked like that. Now that's natural weathering there, because that's, 30 years of exposure to the elements. So we painted it brand new lumber to look like this. And I remember up on a ladder right there and little moments that stick in your mind. The guy I was working with, Robert Bordeaux, he looked at me and he said, I can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember what he said. He said, "This'll all be a memory in 20 years' time." And here it is, it's all a memory. But I never thought I'd be, in the UK watching a video of a place 20 years later, well, 30 years later. But it was a fantastic job to work on this, because it was so long. It was so long, such a big crew. And we were a community unto ourselves. So those are the fake fish there. These are fish drying, like you had to store them when it rains, and you have to bring it inside. They're not real fish, but that's basically what they look like. So that was yeah, it was a lot of fun working on this. See, a lot of this stuff is new. We had to paint all this stuff to look old. So, over 30 years, the ones we built have probably rotted away and been replaced. You use different kinds of paint, mixtures of paint, and you tint the paint certain ways. And creosote, like watered down plastic cement. There's all kinds of different things you use. Vinegar and steel wool. There's all kinds of different techniques depending on what you're putting it on, how it has to hold up. So there's no one answer to that. It's different for everything. You have to make things. You have to make MDF look like rusty metal, and all kinds of different techniques. It's one of the few trades that are left, where there's like real apprenticeship. The only way to learn is on the job. This house here was built in another town and brought in and put up in like one day. It was built in another town because there wasn't enough time to build it on site. And it's a full real house. And it was and you know, there was no road. You got to remember. Yeah, that does work, and it works well. That's kind of a base thing that you can do. It, but it you can't control it, so you don't know what the result is going to be. The vinegar and steel wool. It does work, and it's a good base thing to use in a lot. Sometimes it's fine to use, and it just, yep, that's perfect. I'll show you the next one. So these are this is Sheldon W's YouTube channel. So Brian Tobin got to do a cameo in this show, and you know, he's wearing the top hat and the tails and kind of thing. And he goes in. So this is 2013. So this is another movie I worked on. See the iceberg there? So this is just in that little community I showed you at the beginning, like completely different movie, you know, 10, 15 years later, completely different movie, but in the same town, so to speak. So we had to build this bar, and so this is another technique, and that vinegar and steel wool was used on this. We did use vinegar and steel wool on it. Well, I didn't, but the painters did on this. And it gives you a good, because that's brand new. Remember I was telling you about the fence panels? You guys put them up, clapboard, we call it. That's those fence panels. Well, it's not. It's individual pieces of wood that you put on. That's how we do it. Every house in North America has this, or the modern plastic version that looks like this. So that's brand new wood, and it's painted to look like that. So it's more than just the vinegar and steel wool. And there were two painters, and they got into an argument over whether, because we're featherboard, you guys call it, yeah, clapboard, we call it. They got into a really big argument whether seawater would work or not in this painting technique. I can't remember whether it did or not, because the ocean is right there. You know, like the front of this building is the ocean. You'll see in a second. So all of this is brand new wood. 2013. What year did I do this? I think this is pretty new. I think we might have done this in 2013. Somewhere around there. It's one of the last movies I worked on. And that's the interior. So this is pretty much a real building, the outhouses. Yeah, so it was so much work. I mean, we had to build this. There's only like a half dozen of us. So there's the ocean right there. So as I said, this is all brand new. This is paint. This is brand new wood painted to look like that. So see the iceberg? It's a common thing to see in Newfoundland in the spring. So right here, this is really funny. So there's no building here, and the director and the DOP, the director of photography, and all these guys come down, and they're discussing, you know, where we're going to put the building and all this. And so I'm there, and they're talking about where to put the building, and they wanted it out in the ocean. And it's like, well, if you put it out in the ocean, there's going to be no beach. You need beach, right? Oh yeah, we need the beach. So because they wanted this to be right out in the water, and I said, you know, and the tide goes in and out. It doesn't stay in one place, right? You know that, right? Which apparently they didn't. So as you can see, these are high tide marks where the kelp and seaweed gets washed up, all the stuff. You can see there's one right here as well. So that would be the highest tide. And then this would be, you know, lower tide. And, you know, the tide comes up different heights, different times a year. And so they were talking about putting the camera here. And I said, well, when are you here? And they told me the date. And I said, well, you realize the ocean might be there when you do that. They wanted to put the camera here. And I said, you have to look at the tide charts and figure that out, right? Like, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They had no idea, like, and I said, it's the ocean, man. The tide goes in and out. Like, don't you know this? And they were like, well, isn't there something you can do about that? I'm like, ask King Canute. They didn't get that one either. You do know the story of King Canute, who commanded the ocean to not come in, right? Canute'sford. Yeah, so I looked at the tide chart, and the day they wanted to do it was the highest tide of the year, the neap tide, we call it, and it was right up to here. So the time of day, so shooting is planned way, way ahead of time and schedule. So we know when they're going to be there, what day, what time they're going to be there. And I told them, I said, well, the ocean's going to be right there where you want it to be. But no, we want to put the camera here. Well, there's not much I can do about that. You know, you'll have to rig up something. You'll have to put some kind of stand out there to put the camera on, because the ocean is going to be there. That's but I never so this was a completely different video. This was so all these guys, I've know all these guys well, all these people that live in these houses. A lot of these guys were on the crew, carpenters that worked in the worked on the film. There was a whole lot of walkway and stuff we built too. I guess they took that away. That would have been a nuisance to them. So that's the what we call the government wharf. Beautiful little town, New Bonaventure. And that's what people did. That's what people did there. They were all fishermen. There's not much of a fishery anymore. I stayed in this house. Not on this film though. Like I said, we've shot several things in this little community, and so I spent a lot of time there. So we got to give Sheldon a like. There's one more. I still haven't finished the story of Brian Tobin. This is, as I was saying, we shot it over 2 or 3 years, And there was a winter shoot as well. So we went on hiatus and then came back and did a winter shoot. And when we showed up, no snow. Next day, 2-3 feet of snow. And I had to shovel paths to all the houses. Winter sucks. Snow sucks. It's no fun at all when you have to deal with it. It was fine because I was getting paid to do it, but when you have to go out and shovel your own driveway to get to work so you can shovel snow, is no fun. Yeah, winter is a lot of work. Anyway, that was so the Brian Tobin story in Trinity was like a kind of like the big town scene, right? And they go into town and there's like British soldiers and everything, people in British soldier costumes and top hats and more city folk, right? And Brian Tobin, the premier, whose birthday it is today, was one of the customers in the shop. Can't remember the scene, can't remember what was going on, but you know, we had to decorate this place as a 1800s place. And the saying at the time was that Brian Tobin, the premier of the province, you know, the top guy in government in the province, he came in, you know, he's in costume, you know, in 1800s costume. He came in, he said nothing, he did nothing, and walked out the door with a big package. So that was the joke that went around at the time, because that's what he did in real life too. He came in, he said nothing, he did nothing, and he walked out with a big package. And that's the story of Brian Tobin. So that was a lot of fun, working on those films in those places, in that place. A lot of fun, but winter is so hard. I do not like winter, Sam, I am. It was a lot of fun. And, you know, it looks like a lot of fun, but man, it is cold. One of the last movies I worked on, I saw the guy, what is it? I started watching another show the other night, and I went, oh, I know that guy. I worked with him. Oh, it's some cop show. Um, I can't remember the name, but oh damn, what's the name of that show? So it's a new show. It's about some woman. She's like a cleaning person, and she gets a job. Like she's like some savant kind of genius, and she becomes a consultant for the cops. And the head cop was a guy I worked with. He was a small bit part in a Jason Momoa movie, and we were out on the side of a cliff in Newfoundland, and it was minus 28 degrees Celsius, not counting wind chill. It was minus 28, and we were on the side of a cliff, snow up to your armpits. And this guy, I remember this actor, the guy I was just talking about in that show, he was froze to death, and he was just like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And he was just a bit player in this movie. And he was like really not happy about being there. I wasn't too happy about being there that day either. It was really, really cold, really, really hard working. Jason Momoa is a monster. He is, he's unbelievable. He is an unbelievable actor. Like, he is so committed to, like, he gets in a, these two guys at the end of the movie get in a big fight. You know, it's an action movie, right? They get in a big fight, and he's down. You know, of course, he got his shirt off, right? His shirt and coat get ripped off in the fight, of course. So he's there rolling around in the snow like for hours, and it's minus 28, and he's rolling around the snow, and he was one of the producers on the show, and he's the star of the show. So, you know, he can shut this down any time. And he's like, no, I think we should go again. I think we need another take. And he's down rolling around the snow, take after take after take. And at the end of that big fight scene, they jump off the cliff. And they really jumped off the cliff. They really, really did jump off the cliff. Like a cliff that's like, you know, I don't know, 150 feet down to the ocean. But of course, they have tethers and harnesses and all this stuff, right? But they really did jump off the cliff and go down like, I don't know, 15, 20 feet into a mattress, a trampoline that was fastened to the side of the cliff. Insane, insane. Um, yeah, he's a beast. He's a amazing, amazing guy. Um, yeah, so that's it. I've gone on too long. Let's go back to our photo of Brian Tobin, our typical politician, right, Asterix? He came in, he said nothing, did nothing, and walked out with a big package. So where is our photo? There we go. There's our photo for tomorrow's live stream. We'll see what we can cook up for tomorrow. And I didn't intend to go on that long tonight, but it brought back good memories. So I enjoyed that. Hope you did too. So, as they say in the big movies, see you in the next one.